ladies and gents, Carrot Corner has just this week signed its latest crusher, and its graph looks like this. We make a point at Carrot Corner of signing cash game players who specialize in this format of the game and who are really, really good at poker. I don't want anyone teaching you that's like half good at poker or mediocre or is on an upswing over a small sample or anything like that. If I'm going to bring you professional poker players and get them to make content for you in the subscription library that's dropping in a few weeks' time, official launch date is near, where we're going to be announcing that very soon. I want them to be able to prove their worth, not just with graphs, but through their own ability to articulate about the game, to explain their rationale. And this is a player who is very good at that. He's recorded 2 videos for us already. I'll be introducing this guy to you next week. You may have heard of this player already. There's a little bit of a clue for you, but we'll be getting him on the channel to go over some hands and talk through his poker mindset and understanding and get him to articulate all of his logic very soon. In the meantime, though, I want to go over some hands that I played at 200 Zoom this afternoon. I decided to jump into this pool, do a bit of battle. Really enjoyed it, actually. Totally different flavour to the 100 Russian Cash Challenge. Playing a lot more solid and thinking about poker theory again. It's not that I don't think about poker theory when I'm playing 100 Russian Cash for the challenge, but I think much more exploitatively. The exploitative thoughts are more at the forefront. So I'm going to be showing you some hands from today's session where I got annihilated, some where I won a stack, some that are just completely ridiculous, and some that are like strategically fascinating. We even have a focus hand where I bluffed off a stack with a 4x river all in coming up. I'm going to take a look at that in the solver, see if my play was any good or not, and just expose myself to the solver's wrath. But in the meantime, look at this graph from our newest coach. I want to show you this not just because it's pretty and sexy, but because it really shows you how poker variance works. Some people want coaches to show 50k samples, 100k samples in games like this, and it's just not reasonable or useful to do that. Now, when you're looking at content and you're deciding like who do you want to subscribe to, who do you want to spend your money on, it's a difficult decision, and it's a decision you really want to get right in poker, because poker's hard enough without you making a bunch of missteps. I would say just be very careful if you're hiring someone, a coach or training site or whatever, just based on graph alone, right? Which is probably not the best idea, but if you're using graph as like one of the main things that you're looking for when you're hiring a guy that plays high volume to teach you or to watch the videos of that person, look at a big sample, because this is a year in this player's life, right? This is 2023. And if you zoom into one part of this, like let's say you looked at his graph from 0 hands to about 175,000 hands here. What you'll see here is this guy's break even. So it's like, oh look, Pete Clark has hired a break even guy to make videos. This guy can't beat 200 Zoom. Look at his break even line. Look at his big downswing. Like, yeah, whatever. Okay, you could zoom into a sample that's break even. Like if you go from 430,000 hands or whatever that is, and you look at it to about 520,000 hands, there you go. There's 100k of absolute break even. So as you can see, there's a ton of big downswings, big upswings, break-even stretches. If you were to look at a player's graph from, let's say, 290k to 360k, it would look like they were winning at like 13 BB per 100. Look at this player, 13 big blind per 100 win rate. People don't understand variance. Like, it's so hard to actually grasp the variance in a high volatility game like 200 Zoom or 500 Zoom or something. Obviously, there's a caveat here, which is when you're playing in a really soft game with a very big win rate, with a lot of weaker players, you're going to be subject to less of these massive downswings. The game will be less stressful. You're probably not going to tilt as much. You're probably going to be able to retain a smoother graph like this over 700,000 hands. Like if you played 700,000 hands of live poker, you're never going to have swings like this, right? Because the standard deviation's way lower. We talked about this a great deal in our video. Poker variance is way bigger than you think. If you want to have a full breakdown of what variance looks like and how to understand it, I talk about not just games like 200 Zoom, but other games as well and what you can expect. So definitely check out that video if you haven't already. But first, you know, let's gear up to this launch. Let's go over some 200 Zoom hands and let's see how I'm playing in the game that this coach generated this graph in. Let's see how I'm doing today, what my level of play is like. Am I a bit rusty? Let's get into some hands. Okay, so before we get to our featured hand, which is really crazy and I still don't know what I think about it, there are some other cool spots that I want to show you. This was a massively action-packed session. Like, this was an insane amount of money flying about. I've been playing a lot of 100 Russian cash. Well, not a lot, but that's the game I've been playing the most for recording footage. And, like, people are just so nitty there. Stacks don't fly about at all. Regs are just folding. You can just bulldoze them. A lot of your money is redline. But at 200 zoom, you know, even this guy here that was short stacking was playing some kind of like short stack strategy. You had a lot of top regs using like aggressive actions, balance ranges, good strategies. And yeah, it tends to be quite volatile when you have a lot of good players playing against each other instead of just some net regs calling one and folding turn all the time. So totally different kettle of fish to what I've been accustomed to of late. But a lot of fun, really enjoyed this session. In this hand, we opened the king, jack of diamonds, and we're 3-bet by the big blind to 12 bigs. This is obviously the more polarized range, so it's worth just differentiating this from the small blind range and remembering that it does contain some weird bluffy combos pre-flop as well as the big linear stuff and less sort of 8s and 9s than the small blind range would contain. On the flop, villain goes for the really small bet. I think we have a pure continue with king jack of diamonds against its line. The question is, how often do we want to raise with it? And the answer is sometimes, and I don't know exactly, but there's no way that this can't be one of our bluffs on the flop. We could also raise here with 7s, 6s, ace queen, 7-6 suited, ace king. That would probably be the bulk of it. There might be some weird raises in there that I've not talked about, like 8s sometimes or something like that. That wouldn't utterly shock me. But yeah, it's going to be a kind of fairly structured range with like backdoor draws and then value hands going down to about ace queen. Raising ace queen here does make some sense. If villain folds like 10s, you are cleaning up some backdoor straight outs and of course the 2 set outs, so it's not like the end of the world. Against my sizing, I think villain's going to be in a bit of a shitty spot. Like, he's going to have to defend not just all ace x and actually be 3-betting flop at some frequency too, but he's going to have to peel here with a bunch of underpair as well in order to not be overfolding massively, given that I'm risking 15 to win 30. You know, it's the old half pot kind of thing that's going on here, and so villain is only really going to want to fold about a third of his range in this spot. Otherwise, we start to just print money. Villain calls, and the turn is the 8 of spades. This is a pretty good card for my range. My hand is doing terribly here, no doubt. That said, I think when you get a good card like this that just hits 8-9, completes 10-9, hits the pocket 8's weird bluff, your range is doing pretty well. So I do wonder if you can just bet the turn here without that much equity, but I figured I would be mainly betting turn with like queen 10, jack 10, stuff like that, like the sort of gutters of the world. I didn't think king jack was a great combo. I think ace king's quite likely to 3-bet flop, therefore we're not blocking a good ace, we're more blocking kings and jacks and backdoor diamond floats if they do exist. So I just think that this hand is probably one of the worst things in our range to continue with on turn, and I elected to check, although I do think this is a turn card where a B40 or B33 or B50 is going to be like a decent choice in theory quite often. The 7 of hearts lands on the river and villain checks again. Now I decided that, well, I probably have a few combos of slow plays here. Like, I think I could possibly play 10-9 this way on the turn, for example, but it would be really rare. A set, I think, is almost always going to bet the turn. The check would be really rare. And then I could have something like ace-king, which potentially I can jam with here, but I wasn't so sure. And then I have like ace-queen that I don't think I want to jam with here. So I decided that my strategy was probably going to mix smaller bet and check. And I think ace-queen here, in hindsight, can probably go like b66 or something, like maybe a bit bigger than this. But I decided to go for this sizing this time. I think check, jam, and b75 to 66 are all like okay options in this spot, because we have some value region clustered around top pair. We have some jam clustered around like our slow plays and 10-9 and ace-king. And then we possibly have, well, we have some bluffs and we need to decide whether to bluff. I thought having a king on this node is probably all right. Like, villain could well decide to check the river with ace king here, thinking that they unblock like jack 10 queen, jack queen 10 type of bluffs. I think that's like the main heart of our bluffing range, is stuff like that. And so yeah, I just decided to use this sizing this time, but we could also use a bigger sizing. It's unclear to me like whether I'd rather have this hand or jack 10 for bluffing river. And if you made me guess, I would think the king is a better blocker than like the jack or the 10, but I don't really know, and this is probably splitting hairs. This did get through this time. If you think about villain's range, they're going to get here with like 9s, 10s, at some frequency, although not that much is big blind, and then like jacks and queens and kings and stuff like that. And I think those under pairs are going to be folding quite a lot. The ace-x might just be betting river too often. This probably does okay. You know, it's not needing a whole lot of fold equity here, just around half pot, needing 33% folds. Yeah, I think that's quite reasonable. I don't think we get folds like half the time in this spot or anything. But yeah, I think we have options on the river there, and I think our hands are reasonable bet check, bet bluff, and the fold equity should be okay. Pocket jacks here in the small blind, we decide to 3-bet, and villain makes a small 4-bet. I think we're just calling in these positions. Jam's probably all right, actually. Against the min, I think I prefer call slightly. If villain goes a bit bigger here and starts to put out more dead money, I think jam and call start to perform pretty much equally. I think jam would be okay here as well for what it's worth. On the flop, I definitely think we can raise, call it off, and you could use jam, or you could just use like the more solver-esque sizing of like 3x and then call. I think that's totally fine here. It allows you to have some bluffs. Probably the main way you want to build your raises here is to not go all in, and that's because villain's range is kind of in an easy spot when you go all in here. The overpairs are just like printing a call. The paired board I know is just less good for you to raise in general because your king jack, jack 10 bluffs, whatever you're going to raise here as a bluff is going to be more dead. It's not going to be able to hit 2-pair against aces, for example, as easily or at all. And so I think on the paired board we have a lower raise frequency generally in theory here. Jacks with a diamond is probably going to, well, on the paired board it's less clear, right? Because the protection that we would get from flushes coming and how that relates to a jack is totally different to an unpaired board. So like if we had jack of hearts, jack of clubs, and the jack of diamonds came on the turn, that would be great because we would be stacking flushes and be invincible. So the paired board's a little bit different with respect to like this blocker and what it means for raising. So I wasn't exactly sure how to understand the jack of diamonds here like in game, so I just kind of didn't pay it all that much attention. I didn't think it was as important a thing as it would be on an unpaired situation, but you know, at the end of the day, if a diamond comes on the turn, villain now has less flushes, we have more redraw, so that drives up our equity and probably means that we don't benefit quite as much from fold equity as we do when we don't have this card. So I think call is fine, raise is fine here. If you do raise, you'll get it in, and I'll probably build my raise to about 24 here or something like that, and then do the same with some bluffs and some hands like jacks, which we're willing to fill. But I think we normally continue with call on a texture like this that's paired. And the earlier villain's range gets, right, the more we're just going to continue with call, because he's not going to have as many combos of 10s and stuff like that that can just be bet calling. So when we do raise, get it in on flop, we're usually taking the worst of it with jacks in these positions, but that's not so true later, where villain would have to get ace king in more often and would also have 10s and stuff in the 4-bet range. 6 on the turn, we check, villain checks back, interesting river spot. The 5, I don't think this connects that well with our range because we're not 3-betting 4s or 5s or 6s or whatever from the small blind that often against the hijack. However, this is definitely a spot where we have a pretty big equity edge now, I would think, in solver land. We could use some small block bets here, that's definitely one option, or we could go for checks here. I don't think all in makes that much sense. Although, come to think of it, ace-king probably does have to call at some frequency here if we go all in, but I don't think it's the right line against humans necessarily. It probably is a line, in theory, at SPR1 that you can just shove with the jacks. The idea being that if villain has an overpair, you get stacked anyway, and villain has to bluff catch like lots of non-pair stuff here. My main worry in game was that people weren't going to bluff catch ace-king and the like often enough. Now that might be a hang up from playing in a soft pool recently for this challenge. Maybe rigs in this game are doing a better job of that, but I just felt if I went all in, it would be a little bit dicey, given that villain can still have overpairs and does have to hero like ace high at a decent frequency to make that okay. So I landed upon check, and I guess I don't love this with my blockers specifically, and blockers are not the be all and end all. We shouldn't get carried away with them. But if there's a hand that villain's checking back turn with at this SPR, it's probably like the jack X of diamonds and spades, because those hands need to realize at this SPR. They could shove, I suppose, as well. Maybe they just jam a lot, actually. But yeah, I was thinking that we do blocks and bluffs here, or maybe therefore better off just making some form of value bet. We don't need to go all in. We can block bet, we can half pot, something like that. In hindsight, I think with this hand specifically, I prefer just betting the river. But villain's fairly polar. I think on the 5 he's less polar because ace 5 actually hits a pair that's going to check back, whereas on a brick river ace 5 might be one of the bluffs still. It's a common 4-bet pre. You can have like king queen, you can have like king 10 and stuff, but yeah, we're definitely blocking a decent amount of bluffs with this combo. We're unblocking ace king and the like. We're probably just better off value betting. I don't love this check now. In hindsight, I like a bet a lot better, actually. So I'd say this is like a small mistake. In some pools, it'll be fine to play this way because people are just not bluff catching ace high enough at all. But I think in this pool, we can definitely go for value bet here. This hand was played against a recreational player, perhaps better known as a businessman. No, a fish. We're going to say fish on this channel. So here we have ace 10. We've called out with the big blind, which I think is super normal. We could 3-bet here, but they get a bit sticky with like ace jack off pre and stuff like that here, so I don't actually know that this is great. By the way, I stole that line from our new instructor. I was watching one of the videos he made for us the other day, and he had a similar spot pre-flop where he made the argument that like a lot of rec players are actually over-defending certain hands pre, and that might mean that your medium-suited aces generate less fold equity from hands that are crushing them. So yeah, therefore, keeping villain's range wider, playing this as a call, makes some sense, but I don't actually hate 3-bet here at all. Villain goes big-ish on the flop about b60, we make the call. On the turn, villain is a recreational player who's overbetting. What does it mean when a rec player overbets on double flush draw ace high board? Like, what do you guys think that range is? Do you think it's really bluffy? Do you think it's not very bluffy? Do you think it's mainly the nuts? Do you think it's 1 pair, 2 pair sets? What do you think? Pause the video, have a think about it. The answer is, of course, that this is a pretty strong range from early position that's double barreling on this card. Generally, the motivating factor here is protection, denial. The fact there's 2 flush draws, not wanting to lose what they've got, wanting to protect their resources. So episode 1 of my True EV series, which is dropping only for Carrot Corner subscribers, though I might actually air the first episode on YouTube for you guys for free at some point. Stay tuned for that. But it's all about how to play a strong hand against a strong range that's under bluffing. So when you think your opponent is under bluffing throughout the combination of the turn and the river, you're going to do way less well than a solver will by taking the trappy line of calling here. That means you're going to do better, relatively speaking, by jamming. And you could raise smaller here, but I don't actually think it's necessary because I think villain's range is absolutely riddled with ace-king combos, ace-queen combos, ace-4, ace-9, stuff like this. They can have 9s and 4s as well, and aces and 10s at a tiny frequency, but I'm not so worried about that. If villain does fold and they have a flush draw or queen jack or something, I'm not at all disheartened. A very useful litmus test for whether to fast play is often to ask yourself, do I rate my fold equity here? Not like do I rate the quantity of it, but do I rate the quality of my fold equity? I.e., if I make villain fold here, are there many hands where I'm like, whew, I dodged a bulla on some rivers there, that's cool. Or am I just making him fold dead stuff? And here I'm definitely making my opponent fold a lot of live stuff when I jam. So I just went for jam here, fast hand, fast play with a good hand against a strong range. That's the mantra. Fish overbet here is very strong. Get the money in. Don't do anything fancy. We get called here by ace-9 and we scoop a nice pot. Some of these hands are quite fast. Some we're going to go into a bit more detail, including our feature hand where I lost my shit and got stacked, and that's coming up very soon. So keep watching. This is ace-3 of spades in the small blind. We go for 3-bet. Villain calls in a button. Jack-5 deuce. Very good board for range. The 5 and the deuce are innocuously low enough that we're not overly concerned about them smashing villain's range. Jack 6-7 is a worse board for us than Jack 5 deuce. I think big bet's the way to go here with a lot of our range. We're kind of rushing pot growth. The opponent has some merged combos here like ace 4 and flush draws and things like that, and pocket pairs as well that are just mediocre. We have a big nut advantage with ace jack, king jack at higher frequency because we don't 4-bet the offsuit ones like villain does. So we've 3-bet, right? So we can't 4-bet when you're the 3-better. It's impossible. It's not even your place to even consider it. And so, yeah, we just want to go ahead and bet big with that nut advantage over pair region that wants to drive pot growth pretty quickly here, especially at 120 big blind stack depth rather than 110. So we go for a big bet. We get peeled. Can't see villain's call there, but it is the same amount that we bet, trust me. 5 of spades comes on the turn, and this to me is the part of our range that we don't want to check. The problem with checking here is that our hand becomes quickly useless. Like, it gets reduced to indifference very quickly and easily by almost all bet sizes, and that's because it can't really check jam. It's lacking the equity for that. It can't really check call because it's lacking the showdown value for that, although it might not be awful against tiny bets. And it can't really check fold, or it can, but it would rather not check fold. So this is the kind of hand we call no man's land in the Carrot Poker School, and that usually bets, right? You'll see this trend in solvers that hands of this ilk are normally betting. Villain folds, but useful to recognize that little island of hands that is got something going for it. It's not hopeless, but it's not really robust enough to check call or prosperous enough to check raise as a bluff. Pocket potatoes. Now, if you still don't know why these are called the pocket potatoes, you will never know. I've told you this before. I'm never going to tell you. Just move on. Just try and forget about it. I know it's difficult, but you're never going to know. We go for an open here in the hijack. Cutoff calls. The big blind calls. It's 10, jack, 8. We check. And of course, villain 50 in the cutoff takes the very reasonable line of all in. At this point in the hand, I am thinking, cool, this is never the nuts. Okay, it is sometimes the nuts, but it's mostly top pair. That's like, oh my god, I hit jack and board scary, must deny. Weaker players are like dogs with bones. You know when dogs have like really shit bones? Like they're not even good bones. Sometimes like my dog will find something on the floor and it'll be like the polystyrene from like some container that fell out of the recycling, and the dog will be like under the table like like shouting at anyone that walks past, and it's like, mate, that's not even worth anything. Like, why are you protecting that? Why are you putting so much of your energy into protecting the equity of your polystyrene foam container on this node of you being under the table and me walking past? That's the configuration here. In this spot, this opponent thinks that Ace Jack is a good hand, then it's worthy of protection, when it's actually just a piece of polystyrene from the recycling. Things get kind of bad though. Not bad, but they get a bit like weird when this happens. And it's like, okay, so this guy has a really good hand, because I don't think this guy calls enough in this spot. I think this player probably doesn't hero enough here because they think that the cutoff's range is stronger than it is. That would be my guess of how the average reg plays, although some of them are good in this pool, so maybe not. Our hand is a call, because if we run into Queen 9 or 9-7, we have a ton of redraw and amazing pot odds, and very often we just have the best hand and are miles ahead here. So clearly we're not folding. And this guy had Queen 9. Can you guess what the dog under the table had? Did they have a foam polystyrene container, or did they have an actual piece of meat? No, they had literally like a piece of cardboard out of the bin. That's what they had here. Like, it wasn't even a bone. It wasn't even like a fake plastic bone. It was nothing. Nothing. So we won that one, and that was nice. Big Slick is a drawing hand. Everybody knows that. You should not be putting much money in before the flop with the Big Slick, because you should generally just find out where you're at. Big Slick, it's a drawing hand, son. In my day, no one fast play Big Slick. Something like that. That's the way it goes, right? So we go for the 3-bet here, and it's called by the cutoff, and we're in a pretty good spot here. Ace 10 9. Okay, we're gonna bet range or something thereabouts. We go for like quarterish pot. Villain decides to raise, and you know what? This could be 9s, and it could be 10s, and it could be Ace 10 suited. We block one of the 2 combos of Ace 10 suited and one of the 2 combos of Ace 9 suited. 10s and 9s are very possible. Sometimes they will slow play, because this is a bone dry board where I'm, no pun intended from the dog analogy, where we're actually going to be aggressing turn and river really often and tripling king queen and queen jack all day, and they can check call check raise turn, or check call check call check call, or something like that. So I don't think like 9s and 10s are pure raises here by any means. Ace queen is a raise here. Probably king queen queen jack are raises here. 8-7 suited, something like that. So just decided to go for jam, which I think is a wholly reasonable line. Okay, we're in position. We could just call, but I don't really want to let my opponent realize much equity here. I think that they do have some quite live draws like queen, jack, king, queen, 7-8 a lot of the time here, and they definitely have some worse value like ace, queen at some frequency as well, or at least they should do. So shove just seems good. It's protective. It's a good hand. At this SPR, heads up, ace king is a good enough hand to protect. Like, if we call the flop raise and villain bets the turn, it's not like we're hero folding ace king, so we don't do any damage to ourselves against 9s by jamming flop, because we're getting stacked by 9s pretty much always anyway. Board runs out like this. We lose to 8-7 suited. Yeah, c'est la vie. I may have butchered this hand that's on your screen right now. I may have messed up really badly, and for that I'm truly sorry. I don't want to disappoint you guys. You know, I want to be your hero, I want to be your role model and all of that. I really do. But sometimes I screw stuff up, and I'm human. And what can I say? You know, this may be a spot where I screwed up. I don't think it's a massive screw up, but I think it's like kind of significant maybe. So we squeeze the ace king here to 13 big blinds, and both players called. The villain in the cutoff, villain 44, I believe was recreational. But in game, I don't know, that wasn't like super salient to me for some reason, even though it should have been. Ace 7-3 two-tone. we go for a quarter pot, which I think is going to be our sizing in this spot for reasons that aren't massively important or obvious, so I'll just not talk about it. Villain calls, and the turn is the 7 of hearts. Now, this is pretty much a brick. Our hand is huge. We are losing to Jack 10 of hearts, Queen 10 of hearts, 10 9 of hearts, 9 8 of hearts, 4 5 of hearts, 5 6 of hearts, etc. But we're not losing to King Queen or King Jack or King 10 or King 9 because we block those, so that's nice. The King of Hearts, in a redraw sense, isn't really meaningful because it's kind of hard for us to be behind and needing this King of Hearts to improve, although I guess it's nice to have a few outs against the rare flush. So we went for third pot here. I think in reality we're better off just going geometric and just understanding that villain is a weaker player. And even though this is like kind of the theoretical size on this node, because regs are good at folding ace jack of diamonds on this node when flop is 3-way, and they understand that it's not actually that high up in their range. There was a really similar hand that our coach Sebastian brought here on his first ever YouTube appearance, where there was a hand where it's probably correct to fold like top pair to a small turn bet and a 3-bet pot in a situation like this. I can't remember what that video was even called now. I think it's like high stakes hands with our newest instructor or something. No longer our newest instructor. Sorry, Sebastian. We love you, but you're old news now. Just kidding. We'll have you back on the show soon. But this is a bet that is fine in theory, but I think in practice against a recreational, you might just want to get a bit greedier here and actually size up a bit. I think it would be fine. And on the river, when they don't raise your tiny bet, that's a bit of a red flag with a recreational. Like, while a reg is going to be really good at understanding that a flush can slow play, and it's going to probably do that at good frequency to leave your bluffs in at a low SPR, a recreational player is probably not. And if they have a queen high flush here, they need to worry about the King of Hearts. Because we have the King of Hearts, we kind of infer that they need to therefore worry about it because they don't have it. And therefore we can infer that the flushes that they do have here are very likely to have raised already. Now, does that mean that all in is the best sizing? Maybe, because we have a very high equity hand with the King of Hearts blocker to the flushes that are most likely to slow play. However, maybe you could make the argument that, like, because flop was 3-way and you're deep here, etc., that when you jam, it gets thin enough that it's no longer the best sizing because too many ace 10, ace jack, ace queen are now folding. I think this is really fish dependent. Against some fish, you should definitely go all in here. Against others, you should maybe just B75. I think this sizing, which was like B60, I want to say, I think this was a bit too small. We did get called here by ace 10, but I feel like I didn't actually get max value here, and I kind of committed a pitfall that I'm urging my students not to, which is to put a bit more money into the pot when you've got massive equity. I just think jack high flushes are very likely to just raise this turn against the sizing. I think that's the main issue I have, and I don't think a 7 or a tray are particularly relevant here at all. Pocket jacks, we 3-bet, villain 4-bets, we call, and the flop is jack 10-7. Very good board for us. I think we're mostly continuing with call on this node, but we can of course play some raise as well. I just went for call this time. The turn was the 8 of hearts, villain checked. This is almost so good for range that you can like range bet small here. You don't have to rush pot growth. Your range is doing amazingly. You want villain to like spew jam ace king or call ace king once, or call aces and then feel pot committed on river, so we just go for a small bet. I actually don't like my opponent's play that much here, although maybe it's fine, but he does call this river jam with queens, and I guess queens is like the worst bluff catcher, right? Because like if you think about it, not only do you block king queen, but you also block ace queen suited, so you're blocking 4 combos of like really likely bluffs here. The most likely bluffs, in fact, the purest bluffs that are going to play this way the most often. You could say that like ace queen and king queen in our range don't need to jump through any hoops in order to be on this node. They're just very likely to play this way and then bluff the river. So I don't know if that means villain should fold queens, but I suspect that given we can have jack 10, 8-7, jacks, 10s, 9s, 10-9, we're kind of drowning in value combos, right? So I think villain should be a bit careful here. That said, if we do get here with a bluff, we are probably just unleashing every single time on a run out that's good for our range. So interesting stuff. Okay guys, if you made it this far in the video, well done, because you're about to be rewarded with today's feature hand. Welcome to the Carrot Corner feature hand. Was that corny enough for you? I think it's pretty bad, right? Let me know in the comments what you think. I don't know what the editor did. Maybe he did a fabulous job and saved us from my silly voice. Who knows? Queen 10 of clubs, open, cold call, all right, you can 3-bet, you can call. There was a time when 3-betting was really in fashion all the time in this spot, and people would think you were a fish whenever you cold called, but like clearly cold call is something you should be mixing in here against a good player. Against the bad player, I just 3-bet and isolate for obvious reasons, but this was a good player, I think. 7, King 9, Rainbow. This is a board that is okay for villain, but like with the 9 and the 7 being here, it's not so good that he gets like range bet. So this is probably overdone, and if you lock a solver to range bet here, I haven't done this, but I'd imagine that we get to raise this hand like 75% of the time, and we probably just do a ton of raising now. I rolled a call in this instance. Yes, guys, the RNG is back temporarily when I'm playing in tough games against tough regs and I don't see an exploit immediately. That's the only time it's back, okay? I don't use it on GG because it's not allowed anymore. Like, they literally come to your house and remove your computer if you use an RNG. Like, they send the GG police and they come into your house and are like, sir, there's been RNG use reported at this address. And then they come and take all your stuff, like bailiffs. But, you know, moreover, you just don't need to use an RNG in a soft pool like GG 100, particularly, and you don't really want to because it can get in the way of your brain flowing in its natural state. So anyways, we did roll call here, and villain went for a big bet on turn, which, yeah, there's plenty of natural bluffs here. I think people could probably overdo it here, but the 5 is good for us because it boosts the equity of 6s and 8s a little bit, although we might fold some of that on flop, might fold 6s on flop. Yeah, the 5 is like kind of neutral here, maybe slightly good for us. 7, 8, 9, 8, etc. Picking up a bunch of equity. But yeah, no big deal. This hand is like super indifferent. In game, I had no idea whether to call or fold, so I just rolled. Turns out I should have been mixing raise as well, right? I had a quick look at not the range bet solver sim, but the actual solver sim after this hand. And yeah, there was some raise going on this node. I'm going to show you the output in just a second, actually, because I think I've still got it here. And then on the river, villain checked. And this is interesting, right? Like, we get to this spot with a certain range that is bucketed into different... I want to bucketed into different buckets. Excellent speaking, Pete. It's bucketed into different buckets, right? Because it has the immense value bucket, which is the slow played set. And you might be thinking, well, surely you can't have a set here because you would have raised earlier. But when you're in position, talk about this a lot in the Carrot Poker School, that's not actually so, because you can slow play more facing a bet in position. It's just less urgent for you to build the pot. Whereas if you face a check in position, pot's not building at all, your opponent's, you know, not going to be betting the turn that frequently or that polarized or that big. So you do want to bet the flop with a set here when check to, but you don't have to raise the flop with a set when you're bet at. Hopefully that makes some sense. On the turn, we again could raise a set here, but we don't have to. We can slow play twice. The trade-off here is that while we build a smaller pot against King Queen or Ace King or some kind of double gut shot like Queen 10 that, wait, that's a single gut shot, some kind of draw, let's say, by raising immediately, we also just shut down villain's air and, you know, get less money from the bottom of their range. So we don't have to raise the set here either. And then on the river, we can still have a set, but we have a set really rarely. And so, like, if we jam the river with a set, which is probably what we should do if we have 7s here, we need to make sure we're not doing that very often as a bluff if we want to build a good strategy. Now, you might make an argument here against a weak player and say that if you jam, you just have like tons of fold equity. You're going to need like 85%, but maybe you have 90, and it's just like printing or something like that. In any case, this is a mandatory bluff. Like, you have to bluff these spots, as we talk about in the Carrot Poker School. And I'm just rolling for sizing here against a good player. So I rolled here, and I was either going to B75 or go all in. And if I B75'd, I would be repping. I'd be saying that I had King Queen or Ace King or something like that. Maybe Ace King could pot it. I don't know if I want a third size in there. King Jack, like some kind of thinnish value bet type hand. And if I go all in, then I'm saying that I have the absolute nuts, right? And I've just kind of slow played my way to this river. So I thought if I roll a really, really low number, I'm going to go ahead and go all in. And otherwise, I'm going to bet smaller. And I rolled a 3 out of 100. And that's a pretty low number. Like, I don't know exactly how low that is, but it's like somewhere near the bottom of the scale of 1 to 100, right? So I went all in. And villain snap called me with Ace King. And that hand is not a snap call because it's indifferent in theory, right? It's a bluff catcher. So no bluff catcher should ever just be like a snap call, unless villain thinks I wasn't rolling and I was just like, boom, I'm all in. See if you can call, bro. Let's see if you can do it. Probably people in this spot are leveling themselves into thinking, I'm not meant to have a hand this good. I don't usually check the river with ace king. Now that I've done this, I'm too far up to fold, and that's why they call here. Probably. Or maybe they suspect I'm over bluffing. I don't know. But yeah, I was probably under bluffing for this sizing for the simple reason that, oh no, I called queen 10 on the turn probably a bit too often. Maybe not then. But I was probably under bluffing or possibly under bluffing for the sizing because I was only going to do this on like a really low roll, like sub 10 or something like that. And this is frequencies. It's neither here nor there. But yeah, it's interesting. So I'll give you a quick look at the sim. What is this strange contraption in 2024? Pile solver, is that not that thing they used like 10 years ago? I still like it. I'm a dinosaur. What can I say? So villain's only meant to bet the flop 21% of the time, which is really bizarre here. And so he's going to have to be pretty selective. Villain is probably betting this more than this, so the sim probably isn't like totally accurate, but whatever. It'll be enough for us to get the gist. So they decided to bet this time. We decided to call, and the turn was the 5 of clubs. So we have the 5 of clubs. Villain bets again. Our hand is like indifferent, right? Like, so just before you start thinking, oh, you've got to fold here, like this is, the EV is basically just the same, right? For calling or folding with this hand. We are usually meant to fold with it if we don't want to arrive on the river with too much trash, which we obviously were guilty of here. So we did call and then arrived on the river, which was the deuce of clubs. And at this point, villain is, yeah, it's a good check actually that he's found here, because there is a bunch of air that's being unblocked by this hand. So this isn't one of the pure value bets. Like if villain gets here with king queen, he's meant to always value bet because he's blocking bluffs, right? With the queen, that's a dangler card that's just blocking some air combos. So you got to value bet that one, but you don't have to value bet with ace king because the ace is going to be an unblocker to bluffs. So you're allowed to check, which is kind of nifty. And then back to our shoes, if you look at Jack 10, right, because you can't really see Queen 10, because it's hardly any combinations that are meant to arrive here, we are meant to mix small, a bet bigger, and all in. And when you look at our value region and how that corresponds, we usually overbet with our sets, but not always. Fives is another hand that I forgot I actually had here. Yeah, I guess we can call pairs on the flop pretty liberally in this configuration. And then we go smaller when we have like the king queen or the ace king or something like that. But probably we are over bluffing here because we land on the river with too much queen 10, because I wasn't rolling only a tiny amount of call with it on the turn, and I wasn't rolling enough raise with it either. So I'm probably calling the turn often enough with that hand I end up over bluffing the river. So if that's villain's idea here, then, you know, good read, well done. But overall, I think this is a bit unfortunate to run into ace king. I don't think people are normally going to play the hand this way. And yeah, if you look at villain's point of view there, actually, in the solver, you can see that ace king against all in is folding about half the time. Given we got snapped here, that wasn't happening, so probably we made a punt against that individual villain. But the thought process we had, I think, roughly checks out. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be hopefully introducing the player whose graph I showed you at the start next week, and also announcing a launch date for our subscription service. We're also winding up to Easter, which means discounts on our premium courses are just around the corner. Stay tuned for that at Carrot Corner. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.